Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Livia Ediger, and I am the Deputy Director of ISEP, the International Society of Substance Use Professionals. I would like to welcome you all to our final webinar of the year, in which we will explore the science and importance of self-care. We thought it very timely to offer this webinar at the end of the year, a time when many of us might be experiencing a hectic holiday schedule, as well as reflecting on the past year. This period can be quite stressful and can bring up emotions and discomfort. We know that self-care is critical to ensure that all people remain healthy and well. In the case of those who work with people with substance use disorders, it is extremely important that we keep ourselves from getting compassion fatigue and burnout, especially during stressful periods in our lives. Today's presenter, Carrie Hopkins-Giles, will show us that it is critical that we take care of ourselves as helpers and educators to ensure we can best serve our clients and enjoy a healthy work-life balance. For those of you who are joining us today for the first time, we are an international membership organization with over 34,000 members who work in prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery support around the world. At ISEP, we provide drug demand reduction professionals with access to training and credentialing, with opportunities to build networks, sharing knowledge, and learn from each other's work and experience through our website, our virtual and in-person events, and locally through our national chapters. If you're not yet an ISEP member, I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to join ISEP. You can apply for free membership on our website. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few logistical things. At the end of today's presentation, we'll have time for a Q&A session. I would like to ask you to please send us your questions through the chat function on the GoToWebinar control panel. We will try our best to address as many questions as possible during the Q&A session. For those of you who want to rewatch the webinar or share it with your colleagues, the recording will be available on our website and our YouTube channel. And just a quick reminder that the webinars hosted by ISEP are provided for information purposes only. They are educational in nature and do not constitute medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I would like to introduce our esteemed speaker, Carrie Hopkins-Giles. Carrie is a certified addiction professional with a master's degree in criminology. She ran nonprofit treatment programs in the United States for a decade, is a registered yoga teacher, and trains internationally on a multitude of topics. She was formerly the Deputy Director for ICUDDR and is now an instructor at the University of South Florida. She has been guiding seminars about authentic self-care for many years. Carrie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So let me share my screen. I think, am I sharing maybe? Can you see that, Ms. Livia?
We can see your presentation now.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Livia. Thank you to Kojo and to ISEP and to all of you who are here today. I'm so excited to be together and to talk about a topic that is so near and dear to my heart and so important. And as Livia mentioned, I've been training on self-care for years, and I've been flown to the University of Alabama to spend a day training them on self-care. I've done tons of online and international trainings. And what I like about what we're going to do today is that we're moving beyond some of the sort of basics, if you will, into the actual neuroscience of why it's so important. So if you're someone who has struggled to maybe prioritize this might help you to take it beyond sort of the touchy-feely concepts into really the science of it. So today we are going to try to understand the concerns, as Livia mentioned, about compassion fatigue and burnout, and why it's so important that we take care of ourselves, especially as helpers and educators and people in the substance use field and beyond. And the science around that. Why is that so important with our physiological and neurological responses? And then authentic self-care. I'm going to explain this term and what are some techniques, because all of us will have different things that will help us. So here's a few pictures from some of my activities and experiences. See, I was in a community mud race, and we were doing tug of war there. And then this is me with my college students at the University of South Florida. This was with some elementary or middle school students here in the center. And then some of my yoga. That was a yoga class I did with a group of foster children at the in our community. So just a little bit about me. So like you, I have worked in substance use for some time. And even if we have folks today who are not working in the substance use field, educators and helpers in some way, we are all here because we want to help. We have personalities that are caring and giving. Perhaps we know someone with a substance use disorder. I can say that for all the time I've been working in this field, I've never met someone who didn't say, oh, yeah, my mom, my friend, my uncle, you know. And that being said, a lot of us have also lost someone with a substance use disorder. And I know that we all want to make a significant impact, which is why we're here today. And so some traits that you may relate to are being compassionate, empathetic, giving or generous, wanting to share your own experiences and hope, your own strengths, and you are likely to be personally invested in your work. And all of those things are amazing. They're also risk factors, because the fact that we are so empathetic, the fact that we care so much, the fact that maybe this affects us personally, are all things that can actually put us at risk for, you know, things like transference and countertransference, for being triggered, and we'll talk a little more about what I mean by that, for giving too much and losing that sense of balance between our work and our personal lives. And perhaps we get a lot of our sense of self from the work. So there are a lot of terms we've already mentioned, and I want to make sure we understand what they actually are referring to. And so burnout is defined by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon which results from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And we're all going to have workplace stress, regardless of what our field of work is, but it's the management piece that's so important here. And so burnout, in their definition, is characterized by feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, an increased mental distance from one's jobs, or feeling of negative or cynicism, and reduced professional efficacy. So keep in mind that if someone goes into a field and already sort of is a cynic, then the fact that they are cynical is not a symptom of burnout. What happens, and this we'll see happens in compassion fatigue as well, is we go in hopeful and excited and feeling we can make a difference, and perhaps through the work or through not managing these chronic workplace stress, we end up losing some of that hope and some of that idealism. And so compassion fatigue refers to a state experienced by those helping people in distress. It's an extreme state of tension and preoccupation with the suffering of those being helped, to the degree that it can create a secondary traumatic stress for the helper. And so this is where we kind of don't feel that same level of compassion that we felt when we began working with folks who were struggling. And this is actually something that is being studied more frequently in the field of trauma. I teach a great deal about trauma at my university, and compassion fatigue is becoming part of that conversation, which is important because basically, you can see it similarly to vicarious trauma. We're experiencing trauma from hearing about it a lot and from getting the details and things like that. And so what can happen is that we can actually start to experience symptoms that are similar to someone who has experienced trauma themselves. And it's considered to be the result of working directly with victims of disasters, trauma, illness, or like ourselves working in the healthcare industry. And so when we're helping professionals, we are at great risk for experiencing compassion fatigue. In a lot of ways, compassion fatigue is just that feeling of every day you've come in and you've listened to people's problems and you started out really caring, but it's become more difficult to care. And so vicarious trauma is also known as secondary trauma. This is here, as I mentioned, hearing those firsthand accounts or narratives of events. And sometimes when we have vicarious trauma, which is kind of the more serious of all of these, we actually have symptoms that are very similar to experiencing trauma ourselves. And so hopefully we can take some preventive measures to not end up in that situation. And we'll talk about some of how the self-care work can be an intervention when we're feeling things, but it can also be preventative. And so we might be experiencing symptoms of burnout or compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma, or maybe we're just aware that those things exist and we want to be mindful and careful. And because of that, we need self-care. You are a self, so you need care, period. We take care of our vehicles, our homes, our pets, our children, plants, whatever it may be, even your clothing. And yet we seem to struggle with the idea that we need to take care of ourselves. We are at times not mindful of what we eat, of how we move our body, of whether we hydrate enough, basic needs. And so we need to make sure that we're taking care of our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and psychological health. And it's interesting that this is something that we have to be convinced about. And especially the givers, all of you who are on here today, there seems to be a challenge for like, no, I don't take care of me, I take care of others. And so that's part of why it's so important to me to do this work and to try to encourage you all to take care of yourselves. You know, we have heard about the fact that you can't pour from an empty cup, the fact that if you are on a plane and the oxygen mask comes down, you have to take the oxygen before you give it to someone else so you can help them. These are cliches, but they're cliches for a reason. It is virtually impossible to be effective with others, whether as a counselor, an educator, a parent, a friend, if we are not cared for ourselves. So if we don't have anything to give, we are more likely to be irritable, resentful, struggle. And, you know, if we don't have that quiet time or the things that we need for ourselves, it's very difficult to be fully present with people in our lives. So I'm using a few abbreviations here. Symptoms of CF, which is compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma are similar of that to post-traumatic stress disorder. And so they can include things like hyperarousal. So everything is kind of making you jumpy, or you're very aware of your situation. Anxiety, depression, avoidance or withdrawal, intrusive images or thoughts. It could be what other people have been telling you about in terms of their trauma. Sleeplessness and reduced concentration. And maybe you're saying, you know, this is very extreme. And if that is your feeling about this, that's great. That means you're in a better position than many. But perhaps you're just dealing with some avoidance or some anxiety or some insomnia at times. And this is a good time for you to be here so that we can avoid you getting to a more severe level. So in the roles that many of us play, we're expected to provide high quality, person-centered care in an empathetic and compassionate way. And we want to do that. We're here to do that. And the problem is that compassion fatigue is associated with things like insomnia, exhaustion, depression, lower job satisfaction, loss of hope. Remember, I said that we go into it hopeful and excited and believing that we can make a change. Lack of nutrition, lack of spiritual awareness, and poor judgment. So if you think about the fact that I'm trying to serve clients or students or whomever my population is in a high quality, person-centered way, but I haven't slept and I haven't eaten well, and I'm feeling very negative, frankly, and I'm sitting across from a person and feeling like they can't change. Nobody changes. And maybe it's not that extreme again, but maybe it's something similar to that. Then we know that we're not able to do our jobs in the way that we would like to. So let's talk about the brain. Let's talk about the neuroscience. The brain is wired to avoid pain. And this is, while that concept may seem obvious, what's less obvious is that the goal is for us to avoid physical and emotional pain, both our own and others. Our brain is a very primitive piece. It's a primitive mechanism that is about survival. It's not necessarily about thriving and helping others. It's how do I survive? And so therefore, by doing our work, by leaning into other people's pain and by listening and by being there daily, we're actually fighting a lot of our own instincts. So give yourselves a lot of credit for the work you're doing, because it is a lot of work just to show up and be present. And so what happens is when we are dealing with vicarious trauma, or when we're hearing other people's traumas and problems and issues, sometimes our body and our brain will feel that it's in danger. And one thing to keep in mind is your brain doesn't know the difference between the truth or a lie. So if you imagine yourself in some kind of danger or bad situation, your brain responds to that. And an alarm system goes off. And fight or flight or similar responses, fawn, freeze, we have many of them now, or we understand many of them now, I should say. Those are triggered for survival purposes. Now, normally that passes, right? So if I, this morning actually it's morning here for me in North America, and as I was coming home to do this for all of you after dropping off my children, I saw a minor accident. So I saw a car going into the left lane and not seeing that another car was already in that lane, and they hit each other. And so my alarm system goes up, right? Are we going to be safe? Am I going to be in this accident? Is everyone okay? Absolutely normal, because if I were in a situation where I needed to flee, or I needed to fight, or I needed to help someone, my adrenaline, my cortisol goes up, as it should, but it passes. What happens at times with vicarious trauma and with some of these other issues we're dealing with is that we stay up there. So if you've noticed that you're kind of always feeling this level of stress and you're overwhelmed, then perhaps the cortisol, the adrenaline, these other chemicals in the brain have not left when they needed to. And trauma affects the body's central stress response system, and it makes us more reactive to stress and more likely to create the stress hormone cortisol. And cortisol, again, is necessary, but it's toxic when it's chronically high. We need it in small doses for protective, but what happens in our current culture is it tends to be high throughout, and that is not healthy for us mentally or physically. It can lead to increased risk of depression and heart disease. Normally, when we have a stressor, that cortisol comes out, the stressor passes, and the cortisol reduces. Someone with trauma or someone who is experiencing vicarious trauma response may continue to produce that cortisol, because what happens is your brain thinks you're still in danger. And so you have this perceived threat, you have a physical and emotional reaction, your sympathetic nervous system, aka the fight or flight response, is activated. And you can see that you are then going to have poor digestion. You can see there might be issues with the gut, decreased saliva, activated heartbeat, relaxed airways, just things that you need if you're in a fight, or if you need to run from an animal, or if there's something that you need to manage in an acute sense, but it's not healthy in long term. And so the central nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, remains activated, and that keeps your body and your mind on high alert. And our body and mind are not meant to be continually on high alert. But when we have these responses, the brain and the nervous system are stuck. And ultimately, if we don't do something, the brain can actually get rewired so that it's working at that level all the time, which is not healthy and frankly not comfortable. It's not what we want. So there are three parts of the brain. You have your kind of reptilian brain stem, which is responsible for survival instincts and autonomic, those responses that we don't manage, right? Your breathing. Then you have mammalian, which is limbic or midbrain, and this processes emotions and it conveys sensory relays. And finally, the neo-mammalian, which is the cortex or the forebrain. This controls the cognitive processing, your decision-making, learning, memory, and inhibitory functions. This is like your higher level brain. And so what happens when we are in survival mode is the reptilian brain is activated. And so if you're just feeling completely overwhelmed and just everything is coming at you, you're in survival mode. And usually we can shift back into normal functioning and return to that standard cognition, that higher level brain that, okay, I'm safe. Yes, I have 10 things on my list. I'll do one at a time. But sometimes we get stuck in that survival. And when we do, as I mentioned, the stress and hormones stay in survival mode and the reptilian brain stays primed for threat. So that's where you're just kind of in that hyper arousal and you're in a reactive state, constant stress. So the next thing that gets put on your plate, the next client you speak to, the next job task you're given, it just feels like absolutely too much. So an overstimulated amygdala, you can see that here, this can get caught up in a highly alert and activated loop and perceive threats everywhere. So someone asks you to to go to lunch, I can't, I have too much going on, and it's just everything kind of feels like a threat when it's really not, things that are very innocuous. And then you have an underactive hippocampus, which means that you have less memory consolidation. And what that means, why that's important, is because the body and mind stay reactive because you forget that the threat was in the past. So let's say that this morning I saw that accident and I couldn't calm down and I couldn't get out of that time where I felt that perhaps I was in danger. I could be driving and feel that high level of cortisol and adrenaline, just be thinking constantly that I'm under threat. Certainly we want to be safe, but it's a high level that is not healthy for the body and mind. The other piece is that the brain basically is deregulated here, and there's constant elevation of stress hormones. As I said, the sympathetic nervous system remains highly activated, which leads to fatigue and many symptoms, including the adrenal. And some people have probably experienced that adrenal fatigue. And you can see that that affects your kidney, and we have all of these different hormones that just come into play when it's not really their time. GABA is a calming agent that's produced by the brain, but during stress, it's lowered. And that's because if I need to, run from a bear, and evolutionarily wise, then I don't want to be calm. I want the adrenaline to increase to save me. The GABA will need to be regulated so that the nervous system can calm down, though, because we're not running from a bear. We are listening to our clients. We are managing lots of different issues. We're trying to handle the stress of day-to-day life. So we talked a little bit about what can happen with the brain and the changes. And in addition, we'll see that the PFC, which is the thinking center in the brain, can be affected if we're dealing with too much, listening to other people's issues and dealing with potentially vicarious trauma. This area is responsible for really important things like rational thought, problem solving, planning, your personality, and your ability to empathize, which is huge in our work. And so we may not be able to make as good decisions, think as clearly, be aware of ourselves and others if we are stuck in this mode in our brain. The emotional regulation center is responsible for regulating emotions, and it works closely with the thinking center. And we need a strong ACC in the brain to manage difficult emotions without letting them take over. But what happens, as we mentioned, and I just want to bring it back to it, is that when you are in that level of pure survival, the thinking center is underactivated. So you're not having as good job problem solving, thinking, activating yourself. The emotion regulation center is underactivated. The fear center, the amygdala, is overactivated. And so basically the primitive brain becomes in charge, while the more high, those evolved or higher functioning parts of the brain are not. And so in those moments, it might feel impossible to manage emotions. It's difficult to let go, and it can feel like we can't calm down. And there's been some more recent work that shows a distinct network that is centered on the anterior insula and the DACC. Now, this engages when individuals experience effective responses to other suffering. In other words, this area might be the compassion center. And it's here, the dorsal anterior, here in red. And then the area for valuing others' welfare and for consequent pro-social motivation seems to be in this medial prefrontal cortex. And so again, this helps us construct compassionate emotional meanings. And so if these areas are being tamped down, if they're being limited, then we are literally having difficulty coming up with compassion in our brain. And you can see that that is in your insular cortex here. So you may or may not be as interested in brain science as I am. Maybe you zoned out for a moment, but what do we do with this? This is critically important information. I wanted you to understand that it's not that you don't care anymore. It's not that you're not willing to give or you're not generous or that there's anything that you are doing wrong. But it's in fact that your brain is trying to protect you. And so there are ways to prevent getting to these levels, and there are ways to respond to the threats of burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. And much of what we have to do is rooted in protective factors, and that relates heavily to self-care techniques. One really simple thing that I can tell you that all of us can do is to pause throughout the day and take some deep breaths. Ideally, you want to breathe in through the nose and exhale through the nose, trying to make that exhalation longer and slower than the inhale. Why? Because when we exhale slowly, your parasympathetic nervous system becomes aware that we are safe. And so what it does, if that cortisol is higher than it should be, it starts to realize I don't need to produce that anymore, and I can even reduce it. And so just taking a few nice, long, deep, slow breaths with the exhale longer will speak to that part of the brain that thinks we're in danger and will start to calm it down. And then you can make better decisions. You can move on to the next things on your plate. So let's talk about what self-care is. Maybe everyone on here feels like they know, or maybe you're here because you'd like to know more about it. Self-care is really about being deliberate and taking time for the betterment of your mind, body, and soul. As I mentioned earlier, it's absolutely necessary. It is not a selfish act, it is a necessary act, especially for those who are caring for others, whether it is in the substance use field where we are very much pulled in many directions, or whether we are educators or parents or in any way giving beings. And self-care includes any intentional actions you take for your physical, mental, and emotional health. The self-nurturing methods that affirm and protect us as helpers as we take care of others. And the National Association of Social Workers called self-care an essential underpinning to best practices in the profession of social work. It is not in any way something that we should be putting on the end of our list. And so there was some research done by John Adams, who is one of the leading experts on occupational stress. And he indicated the 4 most effective strategies of coping with stress were less work hours and work smarter in your lifestyle type of solutions. So what he found is building resistance, so this is preventative, right, through healthful lifestyle. So that means deep relaxation, nutritious diet, and supportive friendships. Compartmentalizing work life and home life. I know this is very difficult for a lot of us, and it can be really hard to do, but it is so important to have that boundary and that distinction between what is your work and what is the rest of your life. Engaging in regular physical activity, interrupting strained situations and withdrawing from them if they become exhaustive. So, do you need a break from work? Do you need some kind of support in the work that you're doing because you have certain clients who are triggering to you? Do you need help because you're supervising people that you find difficult to supervise? There should always be someone that you can go to as part of your team, as part of your personal support. You can't be doing it on your own. So both Livia and I mentioned authentic self-care. So what is that? Authentic self-care is the fact that, when we first heard about self-care, at least here in North America, and I can imagine other places, there was this idea of, oh, take a warm bath, light a candle, get a massage. And for some people, that sounds terrible and would not be relaxing at all. For some people, the idea of going to yoga or doing meditation, none of these things are relaxing. And so it is really important to know yourself and know what will be relaxing and fulfilling and renewing to you as an individual. So, maybe music is a large piece for you and something that you have not gone to enough lately. Gardening, being on a team, doing sports. There's many things that you can do that are authentic to you, and they don't have to make sense to anyone else. So when we talk about authentic self-care, that means we have to ensure that all of our needs are met. And our needs are many. Sometimes we think of our needs as just being food, water, sleep, but we have spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical needs. But I will say that I will require of you self-knowledge and courage to listen to what those needs are. And part of that is setting boundaries, being able to say no. So if you are the person at work who always says at 2 p.m., oh, I forgot lunch. I didn't even go to lunch. I was too busy. We're not doing that anymore. We are making a plan, having a nutritional food, available to you, or a plan of where you're going to go get food, and you're going to take time at 12 or whenever it feels good for your body to take a break. You are able, and it is necessary to feed this body that we have. So taking breaks, eating, being able to make sure you're listening to your needs and that you're not putting other people's needs or asks ahead. So as I mentioned, because it's authentic self-care, it's not going to be one size fits all. It's going to be unique to each and every one of us. My partner and I have absolute different needs for self-care. They don't overlap at all. So we have to find our own time to do our self-care activities and do other things together. And so we have to know ourselves in order to know what we might need. And so what do we need in relationships? What do we need from work? Going back to my partner and I, he wants numbers in his work. We had 30 orders this month that we did well and on time. Next month, I want to have 35. I'm a social scientist. I'm a counselor. I'm a teacher. I'm a trainer. I don't want numbers. I want people telling me that was impactful. You helped me understand that. You helped me change my life. Very different needs. Physical health, spirituality, social needs, emotional well-being. We have to look at what is the impact in my life if these needs go unmet. And I talked about a lot of those earlier in terms of how it can affect your brain, your body, your spirit. What's the cost of not meeting those needs? And then most importantly, how do I go about meeting those needs? And so what we have to ask ourselves is, what feeds me? How do I recharge? What can I do so that I'm able to do the work that's important to me, or I'm able to take care of the people in my life? And so with work, you might be meeting with clients one day after another all day. I know when I was a counselor, I did. And, I used to encourage counselors to take some deep breaths in between sessions. But lately I've said, how about have the next client come in with you, or the end of the session with the client, and take deep breaths with them. They need it too. And you're teaching them a skill. So, maybe you even put on a YouTube video or some kind of recording that talks you through, even if it's just 2 minutes of nice deep breaths, imagining somewhere positive and relaxing, whatever it may be. Something we deal with at work is dealing with toxic coworkers, those coworkers who are always negative and have negative things to say and bring negative things to you. Did you know so-and-so is making more money? Did you know they're doing more work? That's a situation where you may have to set a boundary with a person. I'm just trying to stay positive today. We can talk about it another time. Trying to have that boundary set, using I statements to say, I understand that this is a concern to you, but I can't discuss it with you. Handling a difficult boss, obviously those are going to be different situations depending, but it's a stressor that we all have dealt with at times, and making sure we have a team, a support system, our friends, our family, a counselor, whoever it is, to help you with that. Challenging client issues, one thing I mentioned earlier is that you may be triggered by certain folks. When I deal with a client who is very like, oh, there's no solution, it's just everything's terrible and there's nothing we can do, that can be really triggering to me. And that's a client that I can try very hard to work with, but I'll need support. And sometimes it's just not a good match if I'm able to switch with another counselor. And not feeling appreciated or fulfilled. Sometimes we have to bring that appreciation or fulfillment to ourselves. Another thing that's very interesting, and you're going to say, Carrie, how? I don't have time. But volunteering actually can bring us back to why we do what we do. And the nice thing with volunteering is typically you walk in, you do something that is helpful to someone, and you leave. You don't do paperwork, you don't deal with the stress of bosses and things like that. And so the research shows that that actually can really help when you're feeling burnout. So self-care is a skill. It requires practice. It can be improved. You can prioritize it. It can become second nature. It's second nature for me. It can be modeled. I just mentioned how you could do some deep breathing with your clients. That would be modeling self-care with them. And a lot of you may be from different cultures than my own, and maybe it is very foreign to you, and that is absolutely okay. We can teach in certain cultures and populations and subgroups, we can teach the value and the importance. It definitely doesn't have to be expensive. You know, this idea of paying to go to yoga or getting a massage, it's unnecessary. And it can be done in any circumstance to some extent. So some really important skills and habits are those clear, firm boundaries I mentioned. Making sure that what you're doing provides you with personal fulfillment. You know, not every part of our job is going to be personally fulfilling at every moment, but is a good percentage of it. Healthy detachment. So with those clear, firm boundaries, we care about the people we work with. We care about our clients and our students and people we supervise, but we also have to be able to care about them and then do what we can and release ourselves. We need regular social interaction to keep ourselves happy and connected outside of work. Gratitude practices is one of my favorite, and it can be so simple. You can say to yourself before you fall asleep, what are 3 things I'm grateful for today? You can write down things you're grateful for. My children and I have done a thing called Roses and Thorns, where at dinner, we say one thing we're grateful for, our rose, and one thing that was difficult that day, the thorn. And this is nice with children, especially teens, because then you learn a little more about what their day was like when they often don't want to share. Finding your own spiritual practice, watching your exposure. Remember, we talked about that toxic coworker. You don't have to listen to everything that they want to share. I mentioned my partner and I are very different. He's constantly listening to things on the news. I am not. When he starts telling me 1, 2, 3, 4 negative news stories at a certain point, I let him know, okay, I can't, you know, we need to switch to some fun videos now. And as I mentioned, having that self-awareness of what it is that's going to feed you. So I would suggest that some of the key ones, if you can't do anything else, are gratitude and mindfulness. I talked a minute ago about the benefits and some ideas of gratitude. Mindfulness is another one, just being present in the moment that you're in. So if you can sit with a client, for example, and really look in their eyes and see them and know they're there with you and feel your own body and feel that you're present, when so often, especially when we're anxious or stressed, we're 4 steps ahead. So trying to really be in that moment, whatever that moment is, good, bad, or indifferent, is a benefit to us from a self-care standpoint. So this is the self-care wheel, and I have one in the PowerPoint here that is empty that you can use for yourself. And if we have time, once we're in our question and answer, we can go back and look at this more. But you can see that it's about finding balance in all these important areas of your life. I just said that sometimes I have to have my partner move on to different kinds of videos. Usually those are funny animal videos. So remembering what makes you laugh, what brings you lightness, how do you move out of this serious, deep, difficult, you know, levels of work that we do? How can you get yourself to laugh? What can bring you some humor, some lightness? How can you connect with others? I mentioned volunteering. You could do sports, music, art, dance, creativity. By the way, I don't know if anyone told you, but you don't have to be good at these things to do them. You can close your door and blast your music and dance around your room, and you don't have to be trained. You can draw something and doodle or write a poem or journal. You don't have to send it in to be published. You can just do it for yourself. So I think we have this idea sometimes that creativity has to meet a certain level, and that's absolutely untrue. So I would encourage all of you to have a self-care plan. You might schedule a certain amount of time every day to do self-care activities. Maybe based on your lifestyle, it has to be weekly, but maybe each day you at least have some moments of mindfulness or gratitude or self-care. The important thing is that you do it. It's going to be individual and unique, and you're going to have to be creative and persistent. Just like with anything else that you change or add to your life, that takes time and resources, you're going to have to prioritize this. Here are some possible self-care plans. This is a 30-minute self-care plan, depending on whether you need rest, health and spirituality, expression, or companionship. This is one that you can say some things you need for your mind, your body, and your spirit. You list supportive people and what you want to accomplish. And then here's that self-care wheel that I showed you, but a blank one for you. So real brief, just 10 ways to make your life better. So if you're not sure where to start, maybe you start by drinking more water. Maybe you start with a gratitude journal or reading a useful and interesting book. And these are all things that we can do with very little resource or commitment. So if given the time, I will go back and discuss a few things in more depth, but I want to make sure we have time for questions. So hopefully now we understand what the threats are to us as helpers, what happens in our brain when we deal with these situations, and what we can do to avoid getting to compassion fatigue or burnout or vicarious trauma, and how we can respond if some of those symptoms have already begun. So I would like to open up to questions. I believe I'm going to stop sharing so that I can chat with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carrie. Thanks very much for sharing your insights into brain science and how it relates to burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and as well as like showing us a variety of self-care techniques that we can all implement in our daily lives. We have received some questions, and also thank you all for your comments. I will also share some of your feedback with Carrie. Let's start with the questions. So the first question is, what are some ways that people can do self-care if they have time constraints? I know you mentioned volunteering, but if you could maybe share some other ways that people could do it if they have very limited time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really like this question because I have a very personal example. So years ago, I had a 4 and a 7-year-old at home, and I was a big runner, but I had just gone through a divorce. And so I often had the children by myself, and I thought, oh, I'm going to have to give up running. There's no way that I can do it with my full-time job and my children and etc. So what I started doing was I would get up very early, and Livia knows I continue to do that to this day, which it's been about 8 years. I would get up at 6 a.m. and because I didn't want to leave my children because they were so young, I would literally run up and down the street in front of my house. And if they needed me, which typically they just kept sleeping, but if they did need me, they would just come out and grab me. And so that was a way that I persisted in something that was important to me, that was I had time to myself, which was very precious at that time in my life especially. I have physical activity, I had fresh air. I started my day in a way that felt really like I was doing something, right? I was achieving something. And I modeled being active and creative and all these things for my children. So there were all these positives. So while I certainly can empathize with the fact that we all have time constraints, I think if we're creative enough and if it's important enough to us, we can find a way to do it. So that's my personal example on that one.
Great, and I can tell you, Carrie, you've modeled it not just for your children, but also for, you know, friends and colleagues. So thank you for sharing that personal example. The second question is, are there conflicts with self-care and religious practices?
Yeah, this is a great question. So especially when I was teaching yoga more frequently, I would get that question because people would say, my pastor said I shouldn't come to yoga, things of that nature. And certainly, you know, there are things that you feel you don't want to do based on your religious beliefs. But I would say that your religion, your spirituality is such an important part of your self-care because it can provide you connection, can provide you community, can provide you opportunities for volunteering, for helping. And, you know, there's so many ways that it can be critical to your self-care. So rather than being in conflict with, I would say that it is highly tied to and can be something that serves multi-purposes.
Okay, good, thank you. Then we have received a question about how should we motivate our young people, our youth, to be healthy and practice self-care?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that at least, you know, obviously it's going to be different around the world, but I'll say that in my experience with both middle school, I guess with middle school, high school, and college, they're well aware of mental health issues in a way that I don't think we were. And so I think that there is already sort of a carrot and a stick. There's already something we can use to motivate them of, you know, to help avoid and to help intervene with mental health issues. Self-care is one really good way. So I think the fact that they're already, I feel like when I was that age, I had no idea. I wasn't thinking about my own health or definitely my mental health. So the fact that so many young folks at this point are aware of mental health and I think would be open to, oh, this is a way to ensure my mental health stays good or improves.
Yes, for sure. I can just confirm that, being like having worked as a teacher myself, right? Like you said, it's very different from when we grew up, from when we were younger. So yeah, sure. So let's see, we have a question here. I guess going back to the brain science that you presented, are there possible ways to do health checks on our brain as an individual, or is it better to, you know, go to a professional?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if, like, what I know about it is that there are studies that have been done that show when in stress, certain parts of the brain light up, such as those primitive parts, and then the other parts don't as well. But I don't know if that's something like your primary care physician is going to do for you, right? These are more like scientific experiments across the board. I think the kind of things that you can go get checked though, or that you can, you know, some of these you can check yourself, is your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your, you know, heart rate, your resting heart rate, you know, these other things that you can check in a lot of ways at your local grocery store, or if you have like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or some of these other things, or you can go and get your an appointment with your doctor and get a whole workup, and then check again in 6 months or a year and see, you know, what are things I need to focus on, and then what are some things that improved, hopefully through some of my practices. Because I don't think most of us can afford or are going to be going to get a brain scan for which parts of my brain are doing great.
Good, thank you. And I think, yes, we've got 5 minutes left. One question was about self-care or health promotion activities. Are they the same?
I think that there's a lot of similarities. I think there's an overlap. I don't know that I would call them the same because health promotion usually is like about a topic, right? Like it's often like heart health or things like that. But what's great, and this is so important to me, so I'm glad I'm getting an opportunity to say it, is so many of those things, the solutions are the same. Because sometimes I think we get overwhelmed, right? We think, well, how am I supposed to eat well and exercise do this and do that and do, but so many of the things that will help if you have hereditary problems, if you have like the cholesterol and the blood pressure and all these things, if you're stressed, if you're getting compassion fatigue, so many of these things are the same. Connecting with people you care about, eating well, getting enough sleep. We didn't talk about that, but I love me some sleep. Exercising, taking vitamins, like so many of these things are the same, because what I don't like to do, especially with a group that might be feeling stressed or overwhelmed or burnout, is give you a bunch more tasks, because then the stress level just goes up, right? So the nice thing is that whether we're talking about heart health, or we're talking about self-care, so many of the solutions, if you will, are going to be the same.
The same, yes, yeah. Good. I think, let's see, yes. We've definitely got other comments, and yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know we will share those comments with Carrie. Thank you all for sending those positive comments and feedback. Carrie, just to let you know, people have asked about the self-care wheel, if we could share that. So maybe when we upload, the recording to the website, we could also include that. And
yes.
Perfect.
Absolutely. And I'll just go back for a second since I see.
Yeah, I mean, we can take a couple of minutes and then I can wrap up.
Yeah, I see that we're almost done, but just to, I will absolutely, everything here can be shared. But I think this is wonderful, because if we leave today and you go work and you're thinking, what did we talk about? This is a great way to look at, okay, what is it I think I need? I think I need emotional. I need to do some emotional self-care. So you can look on this and say, you know what, I'm going to find a hobby, or I'm going to give myself some positive affirmations. I remember at one point in my life when I was going through some things, I posted different positive quotes on the inside of my closet, like where I open my closet door, on my mirror, and that, again, some of these things seem cliche or so small, but they can be really huge. Or, maybe you look on here and you think that I need some help professionally. I need to work on my self-care professionally. Taking time for lunch. Remember, I mentioned that earlier. Not working overtime, getting supportive colleagues, learning to say no. So whatever it is that you're struggling with, this can be a really nice way to look and get some ideas. So both the one that has ideas already on it, as well as the blank one, will be available to you.
Okay, good. And actually, one more question, just because we spend so many hours of our days, on our computers and phones. There's a question about what are self-care tips for IT-related jobs, which require many hours working with computers. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, that's great. So one thing would be, if you're not getting enough social interaction, then making sure you're finding ways to to have social time with others, personally or professionally. Another one would be your physical environment. Like, I am at a standing desk, and I love that. And I will, throughout the day, take a walk or stretch or do something physical, because just sitting on a computer and being, we tend to really compress and hurt our body. And even just that posture can make you feel anxious and depressed. So even if it's just simple, opening your arms wide, stretching, doing that deep breathing, and getting away from your station for a little while if you can.
Good, thank you. Well, thanks very much for sharing your knowledge on how crucial self-care is to maintaining our health, feeling well, reducing stress. And well, I hope that we will all find time in the new year to do things that help us live well and improve our physical and mental health. And just to share a few more comments, people have sent them to us. They've said, excellent job, easy to understand. Thank you for sharing such an important topic. Wow, this presentation is huge for me. Thanks, Carrie, a lot for your thoughtful presentation, very helpful. So we'll send the others as well, but I just wanted to share a few with you here, since I know you don't get the feedback since you can't see the audience, but yeah, I just thought I would share a few. And As always, I just wanted to let everyone know you will receive a follow-up email within the next 48 hours with a certificate and a link to view the recording of today's webinar. I would also like to thank my colleague Kojo Adu, our digital communications coordinator, who works behind the scenes, making sure that everything runs smoothly. And on behalf of ISEP, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for attending our webinars throughout the year. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to attend our webinars, and we have had a very successful year in terms of webinars with a total of 46 webinars in 6 different languages, including 35 national chapter webinars. So a big thank you goes to our national chapters for their hard work. You all joined from 157 countries around the world, so making our audience very diverse. We look forward to the next year, and I can already let you know that we will be back with a series of exciting webinars on stigma, quality in treatment, alternatives to incarceration, among other topics. So please stay tuned, and thank you again very much, Carrie, and I wish you all the best for a happy and healthy new year, and I hope to see you at one of our future webinars in 2024.
Thank you.
Thank you.